In the early morning hours of November 29, 1909, Captain Richard Humble found himself trapped in a nightmare. Only hours after his freighter, the Mataafa, left port, they were enveloped in one of the worst storms to ever hit the Great Lakes. After a mad dash for safety, his vessel wrecked and split in two at the entrance to the Duluth Shipping Channel in Minnesota. Now they sat stranded, bearing the full force of the storm, only a few hundred feet from safety. Captain Humble and the 14 other men trapped in the forward section of the ship spent hours calling for help, but the storm made rescue impossible. Bonfires flickered on shore as the temperature outside plummeted. The 60-mile-per-hour winds ripped through windows and doors, turning the crippled ship into an icebox. The captain looked out into the darkness, where 9 men remained trapped in the aft section of the ship, their cries for help now long silent. Back inside, he found deckhand Harry Larson sitting on the floor, his head drooping as he nodded off. The captain jostled the young man awake. In these freezing conditions, sleep meant death. To keep his crew awake, Captain Humble ordered everyone to their feet. In the light from the distant bonfires that shimmered eerily through the darkness, the men swayed back and forth in a strange slow-motion dance in a desperate attempt to keep their bodies warm, while the storm raged outside over Lake Superior, unleashing its fury on the stranded Mataafa, the ship that this storm would soon be named after. Before we get into the story of the Mataafa, I want to take a brief moment to talk about this video's sponsor, HelloFresh. 2023 will be the first full year that I'm doing YouTube full-time. It's a big life change, and it involves setting up new goals for my health and fitness, my new daily routine, and a new budget. I've been ordering from them for years because I can skip time-consuming trips to the grocery store and get delicious, easy-to-follow recipes that fit my new budget and help me achieve my goals. They have a ton of options with over 35 weekly recipes to choose from. You can select calorie-smart and carb-smart recipes, or even customize select meals by swapping proteins or sides, upgrading your proteins, or adding protein to a veggie dish. They make it easy to eat well with fresh ingredients that travel from the farm to you in less than 7 days. Their meal kits are less expensive than buying all the same ingredients at the grocery store, and they're 25% cheaper than ordering takeout. I'm always impressed with how easy it is to follow their recipes and how good the food turns out. It almost makes me believe that I'm a good cook. To start your new year off right, HelloFresh is offering a pretty incredible deal for the Big Ol' Boats crew. Go to HelloFresh.com and use code BigOldBoats21 for 21 free meals plus free shipping. Thank you to HelloFresh for supporting the channel. Go check them out. Now back to the story of the Mataafa Storm. "32-year-old Captain Richard Humble and his freighter the Mataafa had been sitting in port in Duluth, Minnesota for almost a full week. A series of brutal storms made for a disappointing season, and pressure was mounting to get in one final run. Captain Humble was young, but he already had 6 years of experience captaining ships on the Great Lakes, and he was well liked by his crew. The Mataafa was also relatively new. Built by the Cleveland Shipping Company in 1899, she was originally named SS Pennsylvania, but was quickly renamed after only a couple of runs. She came in at 430 feet or 130 meters in length, with a beam of 50 feet or 15 meters. While the Mataafa was large, her design was simple. Her engines only produced a modest 1,200 horsepower. She lacked a stern deckhouse and instead had what was known as a submarine stern, with her galley and aft crew quarters housed within the hull. Her aft and forward crew areas were divided by cargo holds, with no way to access each other aside from walking the open deck, exposed to the elements. The forward crew quarters housed the higher-paid members of the crew, including the captain, his mates, the wheelmen, and watches. Firemen, oilers, the cook, porter, and steward were all housed in the stern. The Mataafa was owned by the Pittsburgh Steamship Company. Outwardly, they urged their captains to use good sense when gauging weather conditions and avoid putting their steamers at undue risk. But there was a considerable amount of unspoken pressure on nearly every captain on the lakes during this period to get in as many runs as possible so that they could generate the maximum amount of profit. Storm warning flags waved over the pier in Duluth that day, but weather forecasting was in its infancy at the time, and captains relied much more on their own barometers and intuition. Captain Humble's barometer was higher that Sunday than he would have liked, but he felt that there might be a long enough window of calm after the previous storm and before the next one for him to get one last run in. He decided they would go. The Mataafa left Duluth at 3:30 on the afternoon of Monday, November 27th, with a load of iron ore and a crew of 24. As was common at the time, they also towed a 366-foot or 112-meter-long barge called the James Nasmyth. Only a few hours after they departed, as they sailed up the western edge of Lake Superior, First Mate Wally Brown noticed the barometer falling fast. Captain Humble quickly realized that they were headed into a November gale, but he wasn't sure at this point how bad it would turn out. Hoping for the best, they sailed on. At 7:30 that night, as they neared Two Harbors, they were enveloped in a wall of snow. By 2 a.m., waves crashed over the deck from both sides. This was by far the worst storm Captain Humble and his young crew had ever experienced. By 5 a.m., it was clear that they couldn't last much longer, as they struggled to control the ship. Humble realized they couldn't go on. He called down to Chief Engineer Bill Most and asked for as much power as they could possibly squeeze out of the engines. They were going to circle back and make a mad dash for the safety of the port they departed from less than 24 hours before. Captain Humble ordered McClure to allow the ship to swing around in the wind and reverse course back down the lake. Only 20 miles to the east was the potential safety of Two Harbors. They could hear the drone of the Two Harbors light station's foghorn, but Captain Humble worried that the low visibility would make it too dangerous to navigate the narrow port. He instead opted to continue on to Duluth. Waves lashed at the deck, damaging the heavy wooden hatch covers, which could easily give way at any moment, almost certainly dooming the ship. Through all of this, Captain Humble watched nervously as the barge behind them rose and fell with the waves. In order to reach safety, the Mataafa would have to navigate between the two stone piers of the Duluth Ship Channel. It was clear that if they attempted the maneuver with the unpowered barge in tow, it would almost certainly end in disaster for both vessels. He made the difficult decision to cut the James Nasmyth loose. Without any power of their own, this decision would almost certainly doom the barge and her crew. After the tow lines were cut, the Nasmyth dropped anchor and hoped for a miracle as the Mataafa sailed on. Miraculously, that miracle came for the Nasmyth. Her anchors held through the storm, and the crew survived the long and terrifying night, before being rescued when the storm broke the next day. The crew of the Mataafa wouldn't be so lucky, as Captain Humble aimed his ship for the narrow channel. It wasn't long before Captain Humble realized that he had made a terrible mistake as they powered forward, but it was too late to change his mind. The massive freighter was about halfway into the channel when a massive wave lifted her stern and drove her prow down, grinding it into the bottom. Waves pivoted her stern, slamming it into the northern pier. Captain Humble desperately tried to regain control, but the impact sheared off her rudder. She was now at the mercy of Lake Superior. Her prow was sucked back out toward the open lake as her stern smashed into the south pier. Humble made one final desperate call to the engine room to ask for more power, but the engines were jammed. Bill Most shouted, "It's all up, boys," as the men raced out of the flooding engine room. When they made it to the aft deck, they found everything covered in an icy slush. The Mataafa drifted powerless for a few moments before finally grounding just outside the north pier. Sitting perpendicular to the shore, every wave smashed over the ship, and a crack soon formed at hatch number 8, splitting the ship in two. The water around the wreck swirled red as her cargo of iron ore spilled out. Everyone stranded on the Mataafa was in grave danger, but the situation for those trapped in the stern was considerably worse. With the engine rooms flooded, there was no way to relight the boilers and generate heat. The split in the hull left the stern sloping down, with the crew quarters, already low in the hull due to her submarine stern design, partially submerged in the water. Throughout the ordeal, Duluth residents gathered on the shore to watch the freighters fight through the storm. Several bonfires were lit to keep the people on shore warm and to create beacons to help guide vessels to the harbor. One of those trapped in the stern was second mate Herbert Imai, who had gone aft to release the barge's tow lines. His best friend on the ship, first mate Wally Brown, a fellow Michigander, was up front with the captain, and Imai wanted to be with them. It was also clear that even if rescue was imminent, the situation on the stern was dire, as the men huddled under the smokestack, completely exposed to the icy conditions. Imai stepped up the ladder and readied himself to cross the nearly impassable 250-foot spar deck. Another Michigander, fireman Charlie Byron, followed, along with porter Fred Saunders and fireman Thomas Woodgate, one of the strongest men on the ship. MI watched as the waves smashed over his path to safety, counting the timing between the waves. Once he learned the rhythm, he stepped out as a wave receded and made his way forward, crouching on all fours, clinging to the wire rail. When he counted down to the next wave, he braced and shielded his head as water crashed over him. The water was thick with driftwood and wreckage. As it receded, he inched forward again until the next wave hit. He repeated the same maneuver 4 times until he finally reached hatch number 2, where Wally Brown reached out and pulled him to safety. MI waved for the other 3 men to follow him. Fred Saunders nodded and stepped out onto the spar deck. Crowds on shore, watching the whole situation, cheered as the small man followed MI's lead, bracing as a wave slammed him into the deck. Then came the next wave. Saunders kept his hold and inched forward. Another one smashed into him, nearly pulling him off the deck, but he held on. Finally, after the 4th wave, Saunders made it to the safety of the forward deckhouse. Next came Thomas Woodgate. Crowds on shore, many watching through spyglasses, cheered when they saw the large, muscular man step forward. Woodgate followed the same rhythm as the 2 men before him, but a massive wave swept into him and pulled him over the side. Woodgate managed to keep his hold and pulled himself back up on deck. He inched forward, but another wave pulled him over. Again he recovered, but then a 3rd wave pulled him over the side. This time, his head smashed into the steel plating. He climbed back on deck and decided that he couldn't take any more, and he retreated back to the stern. Watching this all unfold, Barn wasn't discouraged. He counted the rhythm of the waves and finally ventured out. After several waves crashed over him, he finally made his way to the safety of the forward deckhouse. He was the last man to cross over. Chief Engineer Bill Most nearly made an attempt, but seeing Woodgate return convinced him that he couldn't make it. Captain Humble, who earlier made an unsuccessful attempt to reach the men in the stern, wanted his crew together. Now, 15 men were up front and 9 were in the stern. While they were only separated by 250 feet of spar deck, they might as well have been on different planets. At 1 p.m. that afternoon, another freighter, the R.W. England, grounded about 2 miles south of the Duluth Shipping Channel. The U.S. Life-Saving Service promptly raced to the scene. Just as they began their rescue, the Mataafa crashed into the piers. The England grounded, but she was in considerably better condition than Mataafa. But since that call came in first, the life-saving crews trained and equipped to save a large freighter were occupied miles away from the desperate crew of the stranded Mataafa. As the minutes turned to hours, Captain Humble couldn't understand why a life-saving crew hadn't arrived on the scene. Those up front were alright for now, but he knew from the 3 men that crossed over that the situation in the stern was dire. The life-saving crew, led by Murdoch McLennan, finally arrived on the scene 2 hours and 45 minutes after the wreck occurred. They had no available surf boats, but the waves were too rough to launch a boat anyway. The Mataafa's lifeboats had already been smashed to pieces. Instead, the life-saving crew went to work trying to establish a breacher's buoy. They used a Lyle gun to fire a rope over the wreck that could be used to ferry the men to shore. But after numerous failed attempts, hope began to fade. Most of the lines missed completely, or landed on parts of the ship that were inaccessible. Lines that made it to the forward deckhouse immediately froze. By 10 p.m., after 5 hours of attempts, it was clear that help would have to wait until the weather calmed. Captain Humble desperately called to the rescuers on shore, begging them to keep trying to rescue the men in the stern, but it was no use. They would have to find a way to survive the night. They gathered any dry blankets they could find and lit every lamp. The only dry space was the captain's quarters. The windows had all been smashed open long ago, and the doors had all been ripped away, making it impossible to keep the room warm. As the night went on, the men did everything they could to keep from falling asleep. When a wave crashed into them, they would run to the other side of the room to try and avoid the spray. They danced to stay warm in the strange glow of the kerosene lamps and the nearby bonfires. By 3 a.m., as the temperature continued to plunge, Captain Humble realized that unless he did something now, his men wouldn't make it through the night. His decisions put them in this situation. He let them down, but he couldn't let them die. He waded into the flooded quarters, filled with at least 3 feet of icy slush, and found a jar of kerosene, some dry matches, and a few rags. Then he found a hatchet and went from room to room, chopping up any wood he could find. He brought it back to his quarters and filled his bathtub with the scrap wood, doused it with kerosene, and lit a fire. The 15 men crowded around. The small fire kept them warm until the pre-dawn light slowly crept into the room. Humble stepped out on deck at 7:30 on Wednesday morning, where he saw a life-saving crew rowing toward them in a lifeboat. Relief washed over him, knowing that their icy hell would soon be over. He looked over to the stern, but he saw no one there. The storm that descended on the Great Lakes Basin from November 27th to the 28th in 1905 was one of the worst in recorded history. 29 vessels were either damaged or destroyed, most of them driven aground by the relentless wind and waves. At one point, temperatures dropped to as low as -12 degrees Fahrenheit or -24 degrees Celsius. A barge called the Madeira was cut loose from the steamer William Endenbourne and crashed near Split Rock, sinking and drowning her first mate. The incident prompted the construction of the Split Rock Lighthouse. In total, 36 sailors were killed in the storm. The surf was still heavy as the lifeboat with a crew of 6 rowed out to the Mataafa. They were able to rescue 7 on their first trip. Captain Humble and his first mate, Wally Brown, realized that they could finally cross the spar deck and check on the 9 men left in the stern. A layer of ice meant that they had to crawl the 250 feet across the ship. As they neared the smokestack, their worst fears were confirmed. On the port side of the deck, they found the first set of bodies, encased in so much ice that they were unrecognizable. The first body that they could identify was deckhand Thomas McLeod, found huddled in a ventilator. Next, they found Thomas Woodgate, the fireman who tried to cross with the others. 3 others, oiler William Gilchrist, 2nd engineer C.A. Farringer, and 3rd engineer James Early, were not found. Brown and Humble made their way back to the forward deck house as the surf boat returned. Captain Humble was the last to leave the Mataafa alive. It took hours to remove the bodies of the men who froze to death in the stern. Some were encased in so much ice that they had to be chiseled free. The Mataafa disaster was not only the most visible casualty of the storm, occurring only feet from Duluth with an audience of some 10,000 people, nearly 1/5 of the city's population at the time, it was also the deadliest. 9 men lost their lives, all trapped in the stern. There was no official investigation into the tragedy. Captain Humble could barely eat or sleep following the incident. He never forgave himself for leaving port that Monday. For the rest of his life, he suffered chronic ulcers. He returned to the lake and captained 5 more vessels. He died at the age of 43 on June 14, 1916, leaving behind his wife Jessie and their 3 children, all under the age of 10. Their oldest, Bernice, was born only a few weeks before the Mataafa disaster. Incredibly, the Mataafa long outlived Captain Humble. After the disaster, the ship was refloated and repaired. She was heavily rebuilt in 1926, and then in 1946 she was converted into a car carrier. She was sold for scrap in 1964 and broken up in Germany the following year. The Mataafa disaster left a deep scar on the Great Lakes. She, more than most others, felt frustratingly preventable. The life-saving crew was heavily criticized, as were the shipowners for pressuring that final run. But lessons from the disaster didn't take. The White Hurricane of 1913 would claim hundreds of lives, and future November gales would take down ship after ship. It wasn't until the loss of the Edmund Fitzgerald, 70 years later, for substantive changes in safety practices to take hold. Today, the Mataafa is all but forgotten. She serves as a reminder of the weight of a captain's decisions. Captain Richard Humble saved who he could, but his decision to leave port that Monday, to eke out one last run despite ominous signs of an oncoming storm, ended 10 lives. The 9 men who were left in Mataafa's stern, and his own, as the guilt of that decision ate away at him and eventually ended his life. Thank you so much for watching. I hope I was able to do this one justice. It's a tough story, but it's an important one. If you want more stories like this, please take a second to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you again to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video. It's a great service, and sponsors like them help keep this channel going. Check them out in the link below. I'd also like to shout out my amazing supporters on Patreon. They are truly the wind beneath my wings. Alright crew, that's all I've got. Until the next one, be nice to people.